about the flow tonight. So I'll be doing a short introduction, and then Marlene will be following that with a 20 to 25 minute presentation on her topic. And then following that, we're going to open up to a Q&A and discussion and all of that good stuff. And so during the chat and just throughout the chat, feel free to type in any questions that you might have. I do have a list of questions that folks sent me in advance, but if you've got anything else that you'd like addressed as we go along, type it in the chat and I'll be following that. And if it pertains to something specific Marlene is addressing right at the moment, I might chime in with that question, or we'll follow up with it after she finishes her presentation. Great. So let's begin with just an introduction of Marlene. I met Marlene during the instructive sessions that she taught for the U.S. Rowing Virtual Masters Training Camp this past August. Among other things, I was taken by her understated talent at identifying and articulating the intricate details of the biomechanics of the rowing stroke from the rower's perspective. It was just so refreshing. And some of us here tonight currently have her as a coach or have in the past participated in her personalized training programs or have received her memorable coaching during a camp session at Craftsbury. So we're all big fans and just delighted that you're here, Marlene. Marlene was among the first coaches dedicated to training master rowers. She's been coaching for 38 years. Her coaching career began in the early 80s at Boston University's Summer Recreational Rowing Program, a community program for adults on the Charles River. And from 1986 to 2005, Marlene coached at the Craftsbury Sculling Center and was the associate director there for 3 years. And then from 2005 to 2009, she was the Florida Rowing Center's head coach. For the past 20 plus years, Marlene has provided training for masters competitors with personalized programs through Royal Row Performance Training Programs, the first remote coaching service for rowing. She also co-founded the new Faster Masters Rowing Subscription Training Service, which serves masters athletes in North America, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. Her coaching has produced a steady stream of FISA World Masters champions, US Canadian Masters National champions, and Head of the Charles winners. She has designed programs for athletes who competed in the Rio 2016 Olympic Games, 2015 Para-Rowing World Championships, and 2012 London Paralympic Games. Marlene's in-person coaching continues as well. She's currently coaches for Aviron Knowlton Rowing in Quebec and Craftsbury Sculling Center in Vermont, and I'm assuming she's not quite there yet because of border restrictions. Royle's publications include Skillful Rowing and Tip of the Blade, Notes on Rowing, and you may have read her monthly column on training in Rowing Magazine. She is the co-host of the popular weekly podcast, Faster Master Rowing Radio. This is an insightful, funny, stimulating, back and forth conversation between herself and Rebecca Caro. Give it a listen. I guarantee you will learn something new each time. I've completely enjoyed it, especially while I'm erging. And past discussion topics include buying a boat, what is rhythm, conscious incompetence in the learning process, when to breathe in the rowing stroke, coaching the release. And my recent most favorite, the Faster 5 Essentials for Rowing: Technique, Blade Work, Stroke Power, Racing, and Fitness Assessment. She graduated from Boston University with a degree in occupational therapy, and as a competitor, she rowed for Westside Rowing Club, Boston University, and the Boston Rowing Club. Please join me in welcoming Coach Marlene Royle to discuss adaptive techniques for masters, techniques to explore as we all age. She's planned, again, a 20 to 25 minute or so presentation with the remaining time for a question and answer period. And Marlene, we're just thrilled to have you with us. And thank you again for joining us here this evening.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm feeling a little bit old after that description. It's like a lot of water under the boat, but it's really nice to be here and to see familiar faces, but also to meet new people, you know, because it's all about kind of expanding, and you know, we all learn something from each other. And, you know, I learn a ton from people's questions, because if one person has a question, that means 9 people have the same question. And so we're always trying to listen to those topics and then design our work or think about, well, you know, how could I solve that problem? So that's the fun of coaching. And today I will share my screen. And today we're going, should I go ahead and share it now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right, let me do that. Let me share my screen. And I'm just going to click the little sidebar off. So today I'm going to talk about, our topic is technique as you age. And this is actually a little bit of an abridged version of the complete presentation, which is a lot longer than 20 minutes. So I often talk about a movement assessment and go into more detail, but given our time restrictions, I've kind of pared it down so that we're able to talk about the most important facts and at least stimulate our discussion and get our ideas going. So the first thing I would like to say is, like, in my opinion, improvement has no age limit. And I think this is a really important concept and mindset for masters athletes. And you can always get better, and there's always something you can do to improve your rowing. And even though we change physically, yes, perhaps our personal best on the erg isn't going to be the same at 72 as it was when we were 50, but it's all relative of how you can continue to get better, maintain your health, your lifestyle. But from a technical point of view, I have seen athletes that I started working with, say, when they were in their 60 or when they retired, who continued to row better and better and better until they were almost 80. And maybe they couldn't train as much time, but they could certainly improve their blade work. They could certainly improve their rhythm. They could certainly do things that did not necessarily require piling more and more hours of training on, because as we get older, we're simply not able to do that. So I really think that anybody can get better at any age, and I'm pretty adamant about that. And I hope you will be too. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, in general, when I'm talking about our technique training for masters, you know, we're going to undergo certain physical changes as we get older. We're going to have changes to our central nervous system, which affects our movement, our coordination, our balance, the condition of our joints, our range of motion, flexibility, lots and lots of our attention span, lots of things are changing as we age. However, these are the things that I think are really key to helping you row better for longer, because this is about longevity right now. If we were talking about Olympic athletes and what they do, their focus is on, what am I going to achieve in the next 4 years? And they're going to put themselves and their bodies through paces that would not be life-sustaining for 20 or 35 years of rowing. We have to look at it that we're going to row for 20 more years or 30 more years. If you're learning to row at age 50, you've got hopefully 30 years of rowing ahead of you. So kind of, we're going to take that perspective. So these are the points I think are really key. Protecting your joints to reduce overuse and injury potential. If we're injured, we're not going to be able to row. And we're going to talk a little bit about these things in a little bit more detail. Perfecting your blade work and oar handling skills. Like, honestly, this is a no-brainer. This takes some work, but everybody can improve their blade work, which is going to dramatically improve your boat speed and give you all the pluses of all the work you've just put into the drive. You're going to get it out of the boat if your blade work and your oar handling skills are good. Maintaining rhythm and swing. Lots of correcting rhythm in in the stroke and correcting your swing, how you're using your body weight. These rhythmical elements of flow are really key to moving a boat well and maintaining good boat speed without huge fluctuations between the drive and the recovery, but trying to achieve a more constant boat speed. And again, this doesn't take more hours of training in the gym. This takes doing drills and technical work on the water. Maximizing your effective stroke length in the water. As we age, our range of motion is going to change. We still have to try to row the best length that we can in the water. And when I'm talking about stroke length, I'm talking about the amount of time that your blade is under pressure in the water. I'm not talking about stretching into the catch or laying back too far in the release. I'm not talking about that type of length. We're talking about how long you're holding pressure in the water. And we want to maintain the best stroke length that we can, which is going to lead us into a little bit of rigging talk too. Improving your coordination and balance as you age. Coordination is going to change. Your balance issues can change. Drills become extremely important, and tricky workouts with lots of variations, speed ups, slow downs, stroke rate changes, slide length changes, all of these things, half blade, whole blade, 3/4 blade, all these types of things, really good for challenging your mind and your coordination and your central nervous system skills. So these are things that where drills come into action, that they're going to keep you sharp, because if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And for people who race, they've got to be on their toes to be able to make shifts and changes quickly, depending on what they're doing or the crew is doing and the water conditions, etc. So this is a really important element. I like to focus on moving your boat, body, and oars as a system. So take a holistic view of what you're doing. You're not a rower doing something to a boat and an oar is doing something separate from the boat. You're really a total system, and we're moving our boat and body past the pivot of the oars. So it's important to be connected to your boat and to think about body weight and rhythm and all of this thing working together in your momentum of the stroke. And our last topic is going to be rig your boat properly. So there are things here that can really maximize how you are set up in your boat, that it's going to help you with your blade work, that's going to help you prevent injury, that's going to help you with your stroke length and help you with your rhythm and swing. If you're not rigged properly in your boat, it's going to be very difficult to do some of these things. So rigging becomes a really, really important issue. And I know Volker Nolte talked a lot about it, and he's awesome about rigging, but this is something to pay attention to. So one of my mottos is power through posture. And our first topic was joint protection. And so one of the things I really pay attention to with the athletes that I'm working with is their spine position. And this is an important element for us because our safest position is a neutral spine. And this isn't my invention. This comes straight from Stuart McGill, who is one of the best spine researchers in the world, and he lives in Waterloo, Ontario. And I happen to have had the pleasure of coaching his wife, who's a very good masters athlete in the past. And a neutral spine is going to protect you from injury, and it's going to help you leverage your body weight to help you swing, which is very different from a lot of flexion and putting stresses through your rib cage and your spine. So we want to protect our spine. We want to have good posture, sitting up, not in a stiff way, but Coach Steve Fairburn, who's the father of modern rowing from Cambridge, England, said freely erect posture, as if you're looking with interest over the horizon, for example. So So it's not a stiff type of posture, but you want to be up, not sitting low in your boat, sit up out of the boat, row tall. And how you sit on the seat is really important here, because you're not going to be able to maintain a neutral spine if you're not sitting correctly on the seat. And I think this is a huge issue for masters, because there is a tendency, particularly with male masters athletes, to tend to sit really back on their pelvis. So they tend to sit sort of back on their tailbone, on your pockets. Like if you were wearing jeans, you'd be sitting down on your pockets on the back of the seat. And that type of a posterior position makes it very difficult for you to set your body angle and to hinge at the hip, maintaining a neutral spine, because you're going to have to flex your spine to reach. And that's a position that we're trying to avoid from the point of view of protecting your lower back and protecting stresses on your spine. So I like to talk about people sitting up more neutral, up over your sit bones, a little bit over your hips, maybe perhaps a little bit more to the front of the seat when you set your body angle. And you need to be able to hinge at your hip to set your body angle versus flexing through your spine. And here's one picture. In the picture on the left, this is flexing through your spine. And if you wanted to feel what it feels like to set your neutral spine, just put your hands behind your head and see what it feels like to rock forward. Setting your hands behind your head is going to set a neutral spine. So it's not necessarily a stiff position, but it's not a slumped position either. The other things in our topic of joint protection, which is a big issue, is there are things that you can focus on in your rowing that are going to decrease stress on your joints. The first one, besides our spine, is your shoulders and your shoulder girdle and your shoulder blades. And when we did the virtual masters camp this summer, which Jessica was a part of, big emphasis from Mark Novak, the PT of the US rowing team, is stable shoulder blades. That means that your shoulder blades are not sliding around when you're opening up your hands if you're sculling, or if you're rotating around the rigger. We don't want to see the scapula sliding on your rib cage and pulling. Think of this as, you don't want to pull your shoulder girdle apart. You want to draw your shoulder blade together. That's stabilization. And stabilization is really important to protect your shoulder, to avoid tendinitis. It could be biceps, it could be rotator cuff tendinitis. All kinds of things can go wrong when you're trying to achieve length by overstretching. Okay, overstretching is not going to be effective length. So stable shoulder, good old push-ups are great for this. Stable shoulder blades. Other things that protect our hands, wrists, and forearms, elbows. Keep this whole complex parallel with the water and above the level of the oar handle. So if your elbows are moving up and down and your wrists are moving up and down and all of these things are flexing and extending, this is putting a lot of stress on your joints. If you're rowing 25 strokes a minute and you're rowing for an hour, that's a lot of strokes, day in, day out. So keeping things level and in neutral is really important for reducing the stress on your joints, on your skeletal system. So with your forearms and wrists, for example, here I say allow hands to pivot, maintain level wrists and forearms. So if you're a sculler, you need to have a pivot point on the handle that as your elbows move apart, your hand has to rotate. If your hand doesn't rotate, it's going to drive your wrist down. Everything's going to sort of, the souffle is going to fall down into the boat, so to speak. Everything's going to collapse down. The boat's going to go down into the weight. The weight's going to go down into the boat. And you need to keep things level. So things have to move with the oar handle. If you're a sweep rower, your outside arm has to stay in line with the handle so that that wrist stays flat. And you have to be aware of the position of your inside hand, which is feathering and squaring, that you're not carrying a cocked wrist all the time. So just awareness of these positions goes a long way. Here in sculling, I said, learn to feather and square with the fingers, which is, I don't know if you can see me right now, but it's more opening and closing this joint in your fingers versus the hot dog or the Harley Davidson method, which is holding the handle and turning the whole handle with the hands, which puts an incredible amount of stress on your flexors and your carpal tunnels. You want to allow the handle to move in your fingers. And in order to do that, you have to maintain a very, very light hold on the handles so that you take stress off of these joints. And these are big things. And right there, that's a lot of stuff to work on already in the boat. I know this, but these are things to start thinking, okay, what's going vertical? What's pulling apart versus coming together? Stabilization is drawing together. Instability is pulling apart, for example. Here I just showed a little bit. This picture on the left is what I mean by allowing the hand to pivot a little bit at the release position and seeing that the weight of the forearms and the elbows are above the level of the handle, and the back of the hand and the forearm are relatively flat this is the release position just before tapping out. And the picture on the right is showing the blade squared and the blade feathered. So I have this little mark on the handle, so you can see that the pivot point is at this first knuckle here, which is called your MP joint, and that joint is opening and closing to allow the handle to move in your hand. So these are some things that take a little bit of conditioning off the water, but can definitely be done. And one of my other sayings is the first way to go faster is to learn how not to slow down. And like as masters athletes, we really need this. So blade work was one of our other things that we mentioned at the beginning of the talk. Clean up your blade work and your oar handling. This is a tremendous boost to your boat speed because poor blade work is slowing you down. And you can gain so much speed by making sure that your hands are placed correctly on the blades, first of all. So when you get in the boat and you put your oars, your hands on the oar handle, make sure your blade is square. So you're in the position of work, the position you're going to be in on the drive, and make sure that everything is level. The back of your hand, the wrist, forearms, everything's level as you're going to apply pressure. Properly feather and square the blade out of the water versus in the water. Okay, so this is like blade work 101 here. If you're feathering in the water, that's creating a lot of wash. It's a lot of drag on the boat versus getting out clean and then feather your blade once your blade is out of the water and you're moving into the recovery. Preparing your blade so that it's ready to go in when it's time to go in, and allowing that blade to bury before the drive starts is also really important to getting a good entry, and effective length depends on the blade being square and when it gets buried, getting that pressure on the blade. So, a lot of good blade work actually happens in the air versus in the water. So starting to separate what needs to happen when is important. We talked about feathering and squaring with the fingers versus the Harley Davidson method. Now, the Harley Davidson method looks really awesome if you're at the start of a race and you put your hands on the oars and you sort of rev the engines a little bit before the starter says go. You can definitely psych out the 8 next to you if you do that, but you just better be good. And what we want to do here, again, minimizing vertical motion saves time. So spending time on drills, fixing blade work issues, it's huge, huge, huge for keeping the boat running. Like I like to say, I don't want the boat to know when the blade's going in and when the blade's coming out. I just don't even want the blade to, I don't want the boat to know about it. I don't want it to interrupt the run or the flow. Those things should be quite smooth. And another big issue is if you're a sculler, nesting your hands at the crossover position. So it's important that your left hand or your starboard hand is leading your right hand versus one being on top of the other, which we call stacking. And when one left hand is on top of the right hand, your boat is almost always going to be down to port. And if you can shift and work on that crossover position, you have a lot more freedom of your handles if you're in rough water to adjust. And you also are going to level out the angles of the oars on both sides of the boat, which is important for your blade depth and your power application and all the other things that go along with our blade work. So here I'm just showing a picture of just blade preparation as the blade enters, just to give you a little visual there. And in this particular slide, you can see that the starboard blade is prepared better than the port blade. You know, they're both in at the same time, but the one side is preparing a little bit better. I would go for the starboard blade in this particular picture versus the other one, versus the port blade. And at the release, here I'm just showing tapping down, that, you know, tap down, clear the bottom edge of the blade, but think about the top edge of the blade moving to the bow, which is different than feathering in the water when the bottom edge of the blade is going to the stern. Okay, you want the blade to come out and then return itself back to the water. So you always want to be working the top edge to the bow. And I will be honest that feathering out of the water is an extremely common problem. Feathering on the drive as the hands are coming in. It's a difficult problem to correct. You have to do a lot of drill work and change this pattern. It takes time, but it's really worth it in the sense of boat speed, because why do you want to give up that speed that you've just worked hard to get? Our rhythm and swing. For our purposes, okay, our range of motion is going to change over time, maybe because of injuries or joint changes. There's a number of reasons. I always try to ask people, regardless of your range of motion limitations, stick with the correct stroke sequence so that you ensure that you're working from your larger muscle groups to your smaller muscle groups, your stronger muscles to your weaker muscles. And even if you have limited flexion of your knees, or you have limited ability to set your body angle, it's all right. Just do what you can do, but stay in the correct sequence, because otherwise you're going to get into compensation patterns, which are going to create problems in other areas of the stroke. I like to favor a more blended stroke versus a more segmented stroke for joint protection. And what I mean by that is more of an overlap of the legs, body, and arms flowing together versus a very, sometimes you can see a very sharp, like legs and then body and then arms, and it's kind of bump, bump, bump type of rhythm. I would rather see the same sequence, however, a little bit more of a transition before parts, so that there isn't a really harsh impact on the lower back, and there isn't a harsh impact on the shoulders or on the elbows when these transitions happen. And this is something you can study your force curve on the erg, and you can actually really work on this smoothness using a visual force curve. Rhythm, I like to use the reference crossover to crossover. That's my reference point. That's sort of my go-to thing that everybody can do if you're coaching yourself. You know where the crossover is, or arms and body away, perpendicular if you're sweep rowing. And I like to focus on that as being the beginning and the end of a cycle. And you can also think of transitions being water to air, air to water. That's another visualization that I like in terms of how the boat is working. And try to get your power through your body weight and your suspension and your swing versus thinking about, oh, I'm going to push my legs and pull my oars. If you can get your body weight moving with the boat, you're going to move the whole system past the oars more effectively than if you're trying to pull your oars through the water. The oars don't get pulled through the water. You move the boat and your body weight past the oars. So that involves getting your weight up between your feet and your handle and keeping that body weight on the handle, which is going to keep the pressure on the blade as long as you can effectively. So that's a whole area of training in itself. But here, as I mentioned again, using drills to improve our coordination and our balance. Gosh, we have a lot of work to do, don't we? But we'll get it done. Effective length, as we talked about in the beginning, you might have changes of range of motion, muscle injuries, things you have to work around. We still want to work on the best length that we can. So your maximum effective stroke length is in my world, or what I use as a reference, is if you're in a sculling boat, you're keeping your handles moving in arcs. If you're in a sweep boat, you're in one arc moving around your rigger, moving around the pin to one side, but keeping that contact of the collar to the pin and keeping that relationship constant lets you know that you are maintaining your effective stroke length. If you overreach or you overstretch through your shoulders, your weight's going to fall away from the collar. It's going to fall away from the direction of the blade, and you are no longer effective until you come back onto that point. And the same thing as the release. If you lay back really far and you pull the collar off the pin, which is a common flaw, and your weight comes down on the seat, that's not effective length. That's just drag. So starting to perceive maintaining that constant relationship is really important. And you have what you have, and you continue to improve those things through rigging, through flexibility. There are a lot of things that can help your effective length. But I would caution people to always stay within a stable range of motion. So I don't think you need extreme positions when I call it falling off the pin, or your weight falls away from your blade, or falls away from your oarlock. Your stable range of motion is your effective length. So you don't want to be ineffective and then have to wait until you're back on the pin or the oarlock to get the pressure on the blade anymore. And lastly, be oriented to the way the boat is going. If your eyes are looking to the stern and you're thinking about going up the slide to go towards the stern, you are actually moving in an opposite direction to the travel of the boat. So if you're a sculler, when your hands are opening up to hug the horizon and move outside of the boat, think about following the oars. So you're letting the boat come under you. You're letting the boat run under you. If you're in a sweep boat, your heels are coming towards your hips versus your hips going towards your heels. Think about the direction of the bow. The boat knows the difference when you're thinking to the stern and you're thinking to the bow. So that's a very kind of simple mind shift that can change the quality of your stroke considerably. And a coach can see it from outside the boat. You can see which way somebody's thinking. Here's just a picture of a sculler that I work with, and she's just always working with kind of keeping her weight towards the pin, work around the arc of the handles. This is just another illustration of keeping the elbows above the handle. So that height is very important. And I like to think of this as like a diamond frame. And it's almost as if the elbows are pointing towards the oarlock here. And here, if you could visualize with the sculler that, if you looked at her hand and she's keeping her shoulders pretty stable and her weight is into the oarlock, which is going towards the blade. So she's not overreaching at this point. She's focusing on separating her hands, but making sure she keeps her weight to that reference point of the pin so that she's not losing stability in the shoulder blade. and this is just a picture of the release position. One of the things here, I wanted to illustrate just the height of the handles and how her forearm and elbow are pretty level. Here, one of the things we made as a rigging change in her boat was we did change it because in this position, her hands are a little bit close together for the release point. So we did decrease her inboard so that she could get a little more separation between her hands. So our last little bit here is mechanics matter, and that's rigging. If you're not rigged correctly, it's going to be really difficult to execute some of these important things. So first thing is your oarlock height. And your oarlock height has to be adjusted so you can keep your weight above the handle so that you can tap down. If you're too high, you're not going to be able to put weight over the handle. You're going to have to do the Harley-Davidson method to get the blades out of the water. Prioritize your catch angle versus the finish angle, or your entry angle versus the release angle. So what I mean by that is if you have to make a choice with your range of motion, aim to get more angle from the moment that the blade enters to the perpendicular versus the perpendicular to the release. So if you can get 65 degrees to 30 degrees, okay, after you go through the perpendicular, or 60 to 30, or 25 to 25, try to get more length in the water, more time in the water from the entry to the perpendicular, from perpendicular to the finish. The finish angle or the release angle doesn't have as much variation as the entry angle does, because there's a certain moment when the blade simply stops propelling the boat. For elite athletes, that might be around 40 degrees. For an average person, that's probably going to be between 30 and 35 degrees. So you can't mess with that that much, but your entry angle you can improve with rigging, with flexibility, with technique, and you can increase that angle little by little as you're more proficient at it. So in your rigging, aim to get a better angle in the water from the entry to the perpendicular and then perpendicular to the finish. Think of like 60-30 roughly. Adjust your oar length and your inboard to help you reach that catch angle. So if you need to move yourself forward, your foot stretchers forward, so that you can get your hip up closer to the pin of the oarlock so you can open the handles more to get a steeper angle, favor that versus a longer inboard and pushing you back too far at the release angle, because we have to find a balance between all these factors. It's not the last thing, but it's the last sort of key thing I would say, is adjusting your footboard so that you get good compression. So you have to find, based on your ankle flexibility and your calf mobility, what is the best differential between the bottom of your heel cups and your seat height. Because if it's too close, your knees are going to be too high and you're not going to be able to get compression. If it's too low, you're not going to be able to drive correctly off the foot stretcher to get the weight of the hips going to get that drive suspension. So oftentimes inflexibility is a bigger issue, and you may need to shim your seat up. You could use a seat pad as a temporary fix, but if you have to do that for long term, I would recommend raising the seat top so that you have a better connection to the boat versus on a seat pad if you have your own boat. So that's a few things that I think you want to look at from the rigging point of view. And the last thing is just my contact information, and I will send this to Jessica as a PDF that she can share with people if she would like to. And I am going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I don't know how long that took, but I went pretty fast. So. Good. Can you hear me okay, Jessica? Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yes, this is
There, okay.
wonderful. Yes. So shall we open it up for questions, and shall we open up for questions? People could type them in on the chat, and while they're getting that together, we can start to ask the questions that people submitted in advance. How does that sound?
Sure, that sounds perfect.
Okay, great. So the first one is from Abigail. She used to use your training program, and her questions would include ideas or recommendations for rebuilding and re-engaging our competitiveness post-pandemic. Virtual racing doesn't drive her competitive streak, so she's looking for some suggestions there.
Well, I would say think about your long-term goal next year. And we're functioning on the basis that we are going to be racing next year. But think about what's your goal 1 year out from now, and start working on that, and definitely start scheduling time trials for yourself, or time checks, or times when you do your fitness assessments, or you whatever your priority distance is, that you start just having a way to monitor your progress along the way, because it's really easy to say, well, I'm not racing and I'm not going to do this for a while, and to get complacent about it. But if you have a group of friends you can do regular time trials with, or you have your one erg test that is kind of your erg test that tells you whether you're staying on track or not, just kind of commit yourself to those once a month type of progress checks, and you don't have to tell anybody about it. It's just between you and your erg, so but keep your long-term in mind. Like, if you're thinking about the head of the Charles, like, the way I look at it is, as a coach, as soon as you cross the finish line in 2020, we start getting ready for 2021. So there's just kind of no slack time there. So
nice. Okay. Can you hear me still, Marlene?
mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
Yep, that sounds good.
This next one is from Maggie. What is the question you wish masters would ask you but often don't? That's the first one.
Oh, that's a tough one. That's I don't know. Go on. I'll think about that.
Okay,
I have to come back to that one.
So she said she's raced in a double and a quad, but never bowed a race and never raced a single. Recently, we've done a few fun scrimmages, just a couple of us on a river, and found it invigorating, but I still wouldn't consider a real race in a single yet. How can club members help bring one another along to the point where we would feel comfortable racing a single? And she goes on to say she's 57 and started rowing at 42, and has been involved in a number of different sports. And as a master, suggests suggestions for addressing short-term injuries, etc. That's another part of that.
So relative to the single, first of all, the single's a whole different animal. Okay, so I think when you first start rowing the single, you have to readjust your entire mindset. Okay, even if you're a really experienced sweep rower, you are not going to hop in a single and just crank away at full pressure the way you think you can in an 8. It is just not going to happen, right? So lower the bar, I would say first. Work on establishing good stability and blade work, and start then gradually being able to work on a little bit more pressure, work on a little bit different stroke rates. But you may not be able to row higher than 22 or 24 for a long time. Okay, so popping it up to 30 probably effectively isn't going to happen really quickly. So I tell usually athletes who start working with me in the single that plan 3 years to get really consistent racing your single. It's not going to happen in one season. You might survive and have a really good time, but you're not going to be consistent. It's going to just take more time. And what I would say is start, you know, have some fun scrimmages. Like I would say, like just, you know, have some weekly fun trials that you do before you go out to breakfast. Or maybe you start saying, okay, this week we're just going to row this piece and we're just going to cap it at 24. And you start to get better at applying a little bit of pressure under a little bit more stress at a 24. And then little over time, you try to go to a 26 and learn how to do that. And, you know, of course, different workouts can help you build up that pressure, but it takes time. That the technical aspect of it is going to take time, and lots of drills. Like invest in drills, invest in the blade work, invest in learning how to row with your blades off the water. So, and you may need to get your fitness off the water for a while you learn to master some of the technical aspects of it. But it is just going to take, it just takes a different amount of time. It's a different animal. It depends what kind of water you row on and what type of boat you're in, but try to get your boat rigged properly. That's a big plus right there. And, you know, be patient with it, have fun with it. But, you know, I like to define full pressure as what you can do rowing effectively, not what you can do. Like if it all falls apart, it's not really, you know, we don't want to go there. Like, let's stay with quality strokes.
Yes. Okay. I'll continue. This is from Ned Ort. He's actually not here tonight, couldn't join us, but I told him it was going to be recorded. And he said, only if time, do you know anything about the ability to recover from deep vein thrombosis, arterial thrombosis, or stroke to be able to row again?
A lot of people have recovered. I mean, it really is going to depend on your doctor's guidelines, but if you have clearance from your doctor and everything is, I mean, some people, you know, they're taking medication to maintain, you know, the blood thinners and things to maintain their blood. But as long as you have a clearance from your doctor that you're okay to row at certain heart rates and at certain intensities, many people have recovered from this and continue to row. I think you simply have to be sure that your doctor's 100% sure that you're not, you know, you don't have any serious risk.
Right.
As much as we can predict, right? So.
Right. Sounds good. This next one is from Anne, who's here tonight. Let's see here. She has a very specific and odd issue with back and posture when not bowing the quad that she developed from bowing the quad. She's curious, what do you think about the drill? So there's that, and if you want to unmute, you might chime in a second. And then she's also curious about what you think about the drill of square blade rowing. She learned the value of that drill from something you wrote, and then we had our guest Charlotte Hollings talk about it, and she doesn't necessarily support that or recommend that as a drill. So wanted your input on that.
I think there are different schools of thought, and I think there's a lot of tools in one's toolbox. And I think there are reasons why you might use a drill for one person and you might not use it for another person. And I think coaches will use what has been successful for them and what has helped them solve problems. And you may use, you know, as I said, there may be people who like square blade rowing would never work for them. I can tell my own personal experience. For me as a sculler, it was one of the best drills I ever did, because the things that it taught me were light hands, timing at the entry, timing at the release, keeping the hands moving at the transition, keeping the rhythm, carrying the shafts high enough off the water. And you know, I used to do it for 16 miles on the Charles River. I could row square blades for a long time, but for me, that was one of my drills as a sculler that I felt really helped me row at a completely different level. Mm-hmm. So I use it with some people. I don't use it with everybody. It depends what we're working on and what the goal of the drill is. So I think it totally varies. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think all coaches we're all going to try to pull from our different hats to solve different problems when we're on the water working with somebody. So there are definitely coaches who do not like to use square blade rowing. I don't know Charlotte's particular reasons because I didn't have a chance to listen to her talk, but I know some coaches say, well, but nobody can blend those skills back into their regular rowing again. And I've heard that argument, but in my case, it was very useful. And in some people's cases, it really commits them to learn how to stabilize their boat with their oars out of the water, because if you're always on the water, you're not stabilizing your boat off the water. So I like it for some specific reasons. It's not a drill that I might use with everybody. It's not like a cookbook drill. I would select that if I think it would help where a person is at that particular moment. So I think all drills are fair game for everybody. So
sounds good. So Anne, would you like to unmute for that description of your back stuff?
Sure. So I don't know if Marlene, in all your experience, I used to bow the quad all the time, and I could tell that I think I was compensating, and I could feel that I was not quite set in the boat. And then when I would not even be bowing, I would be maybe in 2-seat. The person behind me would say, Anne, it looks like your body is like you have developed scoliosis. Like my body continued to incorporate whatever, like a twist. And one coach recommended that I really needed to focus on, as you were saying, the sit bones, sitting and applying even pressure with my legs, because perhaps what I was doing in bow seat was not pushing equally with my legs because I'm steering with one foot. I don't know. I guess it's just, do you have any recommendations on how I can address that?
Well, I would say first, if you're in a bow seat, the boat, there's so much movement of the boat in the bow seat. Bow seat people just have to be tremendously flexible because they're a huge factor in stabilizing the boat. So like you're compensating all over the place for maybe what everybody else is doing. So you're dealing with that. What I would look like, one of the things I think would be really helpful is to get a really thorough functional movement assessment and see where there might be a whole bunch of different muscle imbalances. It could be related to the tilt of your pelvis. It could, it can be all kinds of things. There could be a few different things. It could be how you do you keep your lats engaged all the time? Are your glutes engaged all the time? Are they not? Or do you have a leg length difference? Is the pelvis tilted? Does it change positions during, so there's lots and lots of things, but I think like just sorting out, first of all, like, do I have muscle imbalances that need to be addressed on land? I mean, I think that's a really, really good place to start, particularly like hip joint mobility. Like, what's your flexion? Can you go down into a full squat with your arms up over your head? Or, where are there some restrictions? And then start to sort those things out from there. Like look at a video, how are you sitting on the seat and how does that change? And, those types of things, because it can be a whole bunch of different things, really.
Okay, thank you.
Are you good for some more questions?
Yeah, we're good for 10 or 12 more minutes, I think.
Okay. So here's one from Shirley Reiki from the Los Gatos Rowing Club. And she just wanted your thoughts on the length and nature of on the water warm up before competition. So let's say before either a head race or 1,000 meter. She's asked this of many people and got very conflicting answers. She thinks older people need more of a warm up than younger people. But when she asked Matthew Pezent this question and told him what they do at the Los Gatos Rowing Club, typically. He thought that was way too long and strenuous. So your
I want
thought?
to know how she's hanging out with Matthew Pinson. Tell us that. That's a more interesting answer, right? We want to know. You're sitting in the pub.
Well, I'm from the UK, so that makes it a bit easier.
Oh, so you have an inside line
Well,
here.
not really, but I did ask.
Well, first of all, I would say what you're doing for 1K is different than what you need to do for a head race. And I'm going to say that I think it's absolutely individual. You know, when I was in university, my 8 hated me because I needed 45 minutes to warm up. And there were other people that could do it in 20 minutes. But if I wasn't warmed up for 45 minutes, there was no way I was going to row a 2K race, right? I didn't want to be warming up the first 500 meters of the race. So I think it's different for different people. Some people warm up. I mean, people have different body temperatures. People warm up differently than other people do. You're in different conditions, perhaps. Well, are you in cold water conditions? Are you in hot heat? So what's the distance of your race? But in general, you only have to do what you need to do to hit your stroke rate and start at pace. So that's the goal of the warm up isn't how many minutes you're out there, but it's what do you need to do? So like, I would say often, what I often have people experiment with, I say, okay, here's one of my sample warm-ups, just try it, see if it works for you, because it might not. You know, start rowing 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, and then start going through the stages of the pick drill, for example, like maybe arms and body away, quarter slide, half slide, and do something like 20 strokes at normal pace, and then 20 strokes as an acceleration, then go to quarter slide, then 20 strokes, just quarter slide, then 20 strokes at a maximum, then half slide, then 20 strokes, because you have to get your nervous system fired up and going, not to mention your muscles and your circulation. So I usually go through the pick drill like that, and then I'll ask people like, do 3 20s to get up to your base race pace. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do it by the third 20, do another one. Mm-hmm. And but be sure, like if you want to row the body of your race at 32, make sure that you can hit 32 in your warm up before you start. Otherwise, you're going to be warming up through the middle of your warm up. You know, then put your starts in at the end. But everybody, as I said, you have to practice this at home before race day, so that you're not overdoing it in your warm up, but you're doing enough of what you need to do to be ready. Also keep in mind that at most starting lines, you're going to sit for 5 or 7 minutes. That's a long rest. Right. Okay, in a workout, how long do you sit for 5 and 7 minutes, right? When you're doing pieces, not that often. So that's a long rest before you start. You're going to recover from a lot of things, but you want to think about starting your race as your second wind. You don't want to be getting your second wind. Like you don't want to be finishing your warm up in the beginning of your race. So, Shirley, how long is your warm up at Los Gatos? I don't know the question.
Well, we've had various different coaches do different things. And I think you're absolutely right in the sense that obviously we all have different requirements, but I'm usually rowing in an 8. And so that means to me that because it takes me a long time, I generally have to go for a run beforehand so that
Right.
But it does seem that the older you get, the more you have to spend time on warming up.
Well, again, I think it's different, but there could be also like hydration issues and things like that. Like if you're a little bit better hydrated, that might help you warm up better. And, you know, it depends on the quality of your muscle tissue. You know, I mean, some people, their muscles may have experienced more injury and have more scar tissue. And, you know, they've just been around the block a few more times, and other people might have, you know, have maintained their flexibility and elasticity better as they age just because of their lifestyle. So, you know, there are those kind of differences too, which are partly lifestyle and partly genetic as well. So, but I think practicing it and knowing on race day in different temperatures and different lengths of races that you know, like if you know if your 8's only got 20 minutes on the water and you know, like there's no way I'm going to be warmed up in that, well then, you know, go for a run or bring your erg with you and spin the erg for 10 or 15 minutes before you get in the boat, so that, you know, you do what works, what's good for you, so that you're ready to go, you know, so.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
So here's one from Coach Nancy Churchill. She's joining us from Australia tonight, and she asked about your use and experience with the NK Empower Oarlock.
I personally don't have one, but I work with many athletes who do have them. And the data to me is incredibly helpful. And we do a lot of technical work by using the Empower data, because I can get the, if everything is calibrated correctly, okay, we'll start there, because if it's not calibrated correctly, you're not going to get good consistent reading. But if it's calibrated correctly, it's going to give, it's, you know, we know what's good for you. And so we're going to be able to look at the angles that the blade comes in, the angles that it comes out. We can look at how much pressure and the consistency of the pressure on the blade, the slip, which is, if your blade isn't going in square and you're starting to row it in, the blade's going to have a lot of slip, and there's a factor for that. And then there's a wash factor. So if you're feathering out of the water, you're going to have a really high wash factor versus trying to decrease that wash factor. So I can definitely look at those numbers and, you know, work backwards. And then someone will say, oh, you know, gee, when I did what you told me to do at the release, the wash factor went down, you know. So we're like, it's, you know, it is a nice way to help people work on things who are training by themselves, who don't have somebody with them all the time. And it can be a wonderful tool, you know. So I mean, I love getting people's numbers. So.
Nice. Okay, here's one from an anonymous thrower. She has a shorter stature, and so she's wondering how to gain an effective catch angle with a shorter stature. What is a good spread for her rigging, and how important is it that she goes through the pin at the catch versus being too much into the stern with foot stretchers to get to the pin?
Well, you are who you are, right? I'm assuming she's rowing in a single, and if you're rowing in a single, you know, you can do what you want. You know, that's the beauty of the single. You don't have to try to match people. But I would say, in terms of span numbers, it's hard for me to give you a number, because I don't see you in the boat, and I don't really know what size you are. And you could have long arms and a short torso, and there could be all different, you know, configurations here. But I do like to use the pin as a reference, because when you put your blade in the water, if you can get your hip up, the center line of your hip up to the level of the pin, that's going to help you improve that angle, that entry angle, and get that sharper angle. So I would tend to favor that. And I know Volker's talk was really good about this, you know, that, you know, you may need to pull your span right in, and you may need to shorten your oars right down to get to work on the arc. So you've got to work on that geometry of getting a more full arc of your handles and being able to work around the pin. So it may possibly just take some experimentation. You know, you might go into 158, maybe that's enough. You might go into 156, but you've got to scale the whole system down so that it's comfortable for you, and that you can row the stroke rate that you want to row, and you know, and you're not in pain, and you're you know, things are working in a good geometry. But you will probably have to experiment with that a little bit. But I like to use the pin as a reference and start from there, you know, so that you can open your hands up enough and get outside the boat, which is going to give you that steeper angle. So that's one place to start, you know. But going to shorter oars, you know, shorten the oars right down so that you can pull your span in and get that tighter arc.
Nice, cool. So So we have 3 more questions. So I wanted to check in with you about that, and
Mhm.
if you're, should we?
I'm good. I'm okay.
Okay, good. All right. And Volker is joining us tonight, by the way. So.
Oh, hi, Volker.
Let's see here. This is from Shelley. Her question is complex and personal. So if it's too in-depth, please skip it, she says. She's rowed for 4 years with a straight back posture as a sweep rower, both in the boat and on the erg, and has never experienced unnecessary pain. Ever since she began sculling exclusively, she started to develop a pain in her tailbone area. A rowing coach who is a physical therapist prescribed a slightly more curved back technique with her sternum pointing downward instead of upward. When she applies this new technique while sculling in the boat, she no longer feels pain, but after practicing it on the erg at race pace, she does start to experience pain in her tailbone region again. She's 46 years old, 5'4", a lightweight, and genetically has an exaggerated inward curve in her lower back. She's, what on earth is my next step to a pain-free experience for both the boat and the erg? Thank you so much. She couldn't join us tonight, but I told her your question. And she'll
well, it's without actually seeing how her mechanics are in the boat. It's obviously different to see how she's sitting on the seat and what actually her interpretation is of the physical therapist's recommendations, because sometimes your interpretation may or may not be what they mean. It's a little bit hard to say, but you know, and you don't know what kind of patterns have been typical for many years. Like, you're used to rowing in a certain pattern and your body's adapted to that pattern, and now you've changed that pattern, and perhaps your hip flexors are tight, or perhaps your pelvis doesn't rotate that freely, or perhaps there's some stenosis in your lower back. And you know, there's all these like different factors that it's hard to answer without actually like biomechanically seeing someone. But the difference on the erg is obviously we don't have the flexibility of the boat in the water. You know, the boat is moving in the water. You have a little bit of a flexible situation, but you know, I would kind of start with looking at what's going on with the pelvis position and the curve of your lower back, because you know, obviously you want to have as good as posture as you can, but you also don't want to be in pain. So and not everybody has to have perfect mechanics to row well. It depends a little bit on your body, and you know, we don't know what other preconditions are existing. But I would start with looking at the pelvis position on the seat, and then kind of go up to the lower back and kind of move up from there. But and try to identify, what the differences are, why what's different in the boat from on the erg, you know, and the load could be different. The erg is more repetitive. Okay, when you're in the boat, every stroke's a little bit different, right? So we've got a few other multi-dimensions versus something that's a little bit more cyclical and more repetitive than when we're on the water too. So
nice, thank you. So here's another, this is from Bob O'Brandy. When you're above the work on the recovery, how much do you think of downward pressure on the handles?
a little bit. Enough to get the blade out. I mean, as you're moving, you know, to the, you know, when you get close to the release point, the blades are starting to release. I mean, the blades do start to release as you get closer to that point of release. But you know, the difference, if you're tapping out before you feather, or tapping out, initiating the feather as you tap out versus feathering in the water. So I'm defining those two things, like initiating and getting the blade out without any splash or drag or getting caught. You know, you have to change the height of the handle a little bit. I mean, it's not super dramatic, but you just, you have to be aware of getting that bottom edge out. So there is a slight definite change when you tap out. And I
Sounds
don't
good.
believe in trying to pretend it's not there. So.
This, I believe it's the last one. This is from Ray Thomas. My left arm is below oar handle. Is it okay to have spacers adjusted at different height for port and starboard? She was a starboard sweep rower and she thinks her shoulders are asymmetrical.
Well, you can rig your oarlocks at different heights.
Nice.
Yeah, how much you need. I mean, typically it's like 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter, but if you're finding that you've got some asymmetries that you need to try to level out the oar handles, experiment with that a little bit, and try to video, for a lot of these things, like videotape yourself too, and get some stern shots and see, are you keeping the boat pretty level? Do you tend to be listing on one side, or are you favoring one side versus the other side? And trying to get, I mean, we're not completely symmetrical when we're sculling, but trying to match those angles so that you're not feeling like you're completely down on one side all the time. And you might have to, we all have idiosyncrasies that we have to try to address as best we can. So
yeah,
I would recommend for people to in the Craftsbury webinars, on the Craftsbury Sculling Center page, Larry Gluckman did a really great talk that's called Up and Over the Buoy. And that's a really great talk about blade work. So if you have time to listen to that webinar, that's a really good, and he talks about changing the oar handle height, but it's Up and Over the Buoy, and it's a terrific webinar. So that's definitely one I would encourage people to listen to, as well as Volker's. If you're in the US rowing, the one about rhythm that he did is really, really good, as well as, and the rigging questions at the end of it are excellent. So
nice, cool. Well, you're getting lots of compliments here. Volker actually just said, really liked it. It was great. Thanks for having him. And let's see, someone else, Jan says, so delighted that every age we can keep working on improving. Thank you for helping us with that.
Well,
yeah,
it's my pleasure. I love seeing people get better, and you can continue getting better. Never give up, right? So tell your competitors, oh, you don't need to do drills anymore. Just row, go off and do your work. So
sounds good. Well, if there's nothing else, I think we'll wrap it up here. And Marlene, thank you so much again for joining us. It's been a delight, and just always wonderful to hear what you have to say. It's really wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope, try to follow our podcast, the Faster Masters Rowing Radio. And it's on the rowing.chat network. So if you just put in rowing.chat, the website will come up, and you can always, and it's every Tuesday and 6 p.m. Eastern. We do it live in the Facebook Masters Rowing International Facebook group. So we're live in there if you want to watch it live, but Rebecca she takes care of posting it everywhere it needs to be posted. I don't know how to do that stuff. So
it's wonderful. And I put my email in the chat if anybody wants me to send you links that have anything to do, if you're having trouble finding Marlene online, I can send you all of that information as well. You're getting more thank yous from Ray Thomas. Thank you very much. Thank you very much from Brenda. Always great info and such wonderful encouragement from Barbara Babinski. Thank you so much, Marlene. From Barbara Kelly. Thank you, Marlene. Great presentation and reminders.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. And hopefully next year I'll get to see you on the water somewhere, right?
Thank you, Marlene.